It's good to see everybody awake this morning and have their cup of coffee ready to go. We've got a very interesting program for you here today, so we're going to jump right into it. I've orchestrated this presentation just for you, reinforced exclusively with my own photos to shed light on the fact that just as this tree was shaped by forces outside of it, so is Sandia Labs shaped by forces outside of it. And if you learn how to engage those forces, which is our focus here today, life will be like a walk in a Paris park. But if you don't, you'll find your opportunities cut short, or you'll find yourself operating in environments too frigid in which to move. This is my porch last week in Minnesota. I come from the great state of Minnesota, the land where few are called, but many are frozen. I know that you guys are all come from a scientific background. We don't. But the teacher was concerned about Johnny because he wasn't paying any attention in class. Right here? This is the guy, Johnny, right here? And so she asked him, what is 2 and 4 and 28 and 44? And Johnny immediately responded, why, that's NBC, Fox, ESPN, and Cartoon Network. Now, how many of you think Washington is the National Broadcasting Corporation? How many of you think it's just Fox News versus MSNBC? How many think it's ESPN? How many think it's the Cartoon Network? Cartoon Network wins, especially since Donald Trump got added to the narrative. But we here at the Graduate School of Political Management, the school that I lead, which is the first and foremost school of politics, how to win in the political arena on the how, not the what perspective, we think it's more like ESPN, like sports. You know, we're watching the game between the different sides. We have our coaches calling the plays. We got our quarterbacks throwing long bombs. We have some politicians that are just 3 yards in a pile of dust. We also specialize in fumbles and interceptions here in Washington, and we've been better at defense than at offense. But we're going to be talking about how that all works. Let's jump right into it. We'll start talking about what I call shapeholders. They are the actors shaping the political environment. Now, I know you're kind of a business, but you're kind of a government entity, so I'll try to address both of those as I go through here today. In the business environment, a long time ago, they said you have to worry about more than just shapeholders. You needed to worry about stakeholders. That's the employees, the suppliers, your customers, the suppliers, as well as the communities in which you operate. But I'm here to tell you that there's something outside of stakeholders that has a very significant impact on your operations, what I call shapeholders. And if you don't think of yourself as a business, if you think of yourself as a mission-focused organization, they also impact you, and we'll talk about how they've impacted NGOs, governments, and others. They are the political, the regulatory, the media, and the activist groups. And that's what we're going to be focusing on in this first segment. If you think about a coal company and Greenpeace, and to think of Greenpeace as a stakeholder in a coal company is wrong, because the only stake Greenpeace wants in that coal company is a stake through their heart. If you go down a couple blocks from here to the White House, in the only protest that's allowed outside of the White House, my guess is if you talk to the lady in there, they may not have a real strong interest in Sandia Labs. So if these people don't have a stake in you, but they can shape the opportunities and the risk you face. So you ought to engage them, but not as you would a true stakeholder, like an employee or a supplier or a customer. You need to engage them differently because they have an ability to impact your life. One key part of these shapeholders is activist groups. And let's just talk briefly about the activist groups. They're trying to influence where you get your energy, where you get your food, who you lend money to. And that's in the business sense, but they all take the rules of Saul Alinsky, if you're familiar with him. He came out in 1989 with a book called Rules for Radicals. And in that book he said, the Prince was written by Machiavelli for the haves, on how to hold power. Rules for Radicals is written by the have-nots on how to take them away. Now, you may not think of yourself as a have, but the world, views a lot of what you're doing is to protect the current state of affairs in the world and keep it where it is, so others might view you as the have and becoming your way. Their rules are, first, they want to establish their credibility. Then they want to agitate, rub resentments, fan hostilities, find controversy. Then they want to combine hope and resentment to create a mass army. And then finally what they're looking to do is to goad the enemy, that's the people that are the haves, and guide them in the reaction, and that will be your major strength. That's what Saul Alinsky advised the radicals that were looking to do a change, result in change in the world. And when you think about where did this all begin, the very first big activist group, their biggest victory was the Rainbow Warrior in France, or it was actually in New Zealand, against the French intelligence, and it had to do with nuclear testing. So you guys are at the birth of this activist group, so if you think that these are just ExxonMobil they're going after, you ought to think that you could be in their crosshairs. They could be coming at you in some form or another. The second group is the media. And let me give you a little hint about media. They never report safe landings. If you've gone X numbers a year without any nuclear incident with all of our nuclear weapons, that never gets reported. There's one blip, and of course, that will be reported. But when you think about it, media is a business too. They need to respond to their customers. This is the New York Times headquarters. This is right across the street from the New York Times. This is the New York Times building. Here's the Wall Street Journal coming right after the New York Times saying, introducing Greater New York. Wall Street Journal had been more of a national paper rather than a New York paper. Now they're bringing out a New York section to go right after Times, saying the Times demand it. So they are today a very focused business, both the Times, the Journal, and everybody else. And reporters are also the same. They want to have their own careers. They want to get noticed. They want to have people talking about them. And what you find is that they say anything good about business or organizations like Sandia, the people reading it just sort of fall asleep. But if you come up with some sensational, here's what somebody did bad in business or in an organization like Sandia, people are all going to get excited, and that's what the media are trying to appeal to. So don't expect the media to be giving you a lot of good news. They are an organization that's trying to respond to their customers. The next big category is the political. And when you think about these political staff, they are trying to make a name for themselves as well. And you could either be a positive side of that or a negative side of that. Because they could be saying, I really care about security and I'm going to do something that has to do with Sandia so that I can go on the stump, or my boss, the congressman or woman, can go on the stump and say, I did X. Or they might have a negative point of view and use you as a backboard for that as well. But each of these staff persons is trying to make a name for themselves and for their congressman and bring that forward. Now, I know you're ultimately managed currently by Lockheed Martin, and you think that's a big, smart business that knows what they're doing. Well, I'm here to tell you that although people think that businesses are the heavyweights in Washington, that having had the opportunity of being a Fortune 100 top 5 executive, as well as a congressman, and engaging not just in America, but around the world, helping Pillsbury buy Haagen-Dazs and spread it around the world, as well as engaging politically in 40 countries around the world. I'm here to tell you that one of the biggest surprises in my life was that rather than finding that the voice of business was like the roar of a tiger, that it's more like the meow of a kitten. And that isn't because business isn't big and strong and powerful, they are. But when it comes to engaging with these shapeholders, we oftentimes business as too reactive, combative, and tentative. And so as a result, they end up paying taxes coming and going here in America, the highest corporate taxes of any industrialized country. And they have layers upon layers of regulations imposed on them that make it harder for them to do whatever they're trying to do. Rather than that invisible hand of Adam Smith, everybody pursuing their own individual wants, driving the economy increasingly, it's the hand of government. This is what I call business in a political age. If you get even close to 30 kilometers an hour, that hand of government might reach down from the sky and help you slow down. So, these shape holders have a big impact. Again, if you're mission focused, they also have a big impact. Let me give you a couple of examples. The Girl Scouts. Who could pick on the Girl Scouts? Well, Rainforest Action Network came after the Girl Scouts with a protest and a boycott because they were saying that part of the oil in the Girl Scout cookies came from an unidentified source in Indonesia that was impacting rainforests. So they had to change, and their supplier had to change. You know, where Salvation Army is allowed to put their little cans to collect money is determined by political authorities. And if you think of governments, governments are regulated by each other. How much money they get, all of these impacts them and how much resources they have and their missions. Military faces the need to not only capture the hearts and minds on the battlefield and at home, but in public opinion around the world that's impacting everything. If the United States is going to engage in the South China Sea, they're not just dealing with China and America, but what do all the other neighboring countries and countries around the world think about our actions? They have to pay attention to these shape holders in just as much sense. And so we're all like this pot is being shaped by the potter. We're all being shaped by these outside forces. So we need to learn how to effectively gauge them. My belief that is if you look over the long term, that these outside forces have a bigger impact on your organization than the stakeholders. And so you need to have effective engagement strategies. So I've come up with 7 steps for effective shapeholder engagement that we'll go through very briefly throughout the day to respond to these. It first begins with preparing yourself for this by aligning yourself to a purpose that benefits yourself as well as your bottom line, whatever that is, by anticipating what can happen, because when they come after you, you need to be able to respond immediately, by assessing what they're asking me to do, the opportunity they're presenting, is it legit or not? Can I win or not? And then finally, when you face a decision point, there's 4 decisions: advance, avert, assemble, acquiesce. Let's start with align. Organizations need to figure out a purpose for their organization that aligns with what their main operations are. Let me give you a couple examples in the business world. Nike has picked as their purpose to increase physical activity. Obesity is a problem with other people outside this room in America. They want to help. So they're trying to get more physical activity. If there's more physical activity, that's good for the planet, but it's also good for Nike because people are buying more tennis shoes, they're buying more t-shirts. If you look at AB InBev that owns Anheuser-Busch, their focus is clean water. Because if they're producing beer in Mozambique and they're taking up all the clean water there is in Mozambique, the people in Mozambique aren't going to be that happy. So they need to encourage clean water so they can make their beer and people aren't worried about them taking whatever clean water they are to make their beer. But if you think about it, if Nike and Anheuser-Busch switched, so Nike was focused on clean water and Anheuser-Busch was focused on physical activity, there would be less positive contributions to the world because they really aren't as good at their other purposes, and it would have less of an impact on the business. So you want to find a purpose. And as I go through my classes, I always have them pick a different company and analyze their purpose statement if they have one. And I think you guys actually have one of the better purpose statements I've seen. You have a long mission statement and a mission that in my mind is way too long, but if you boil it down to just purpose statement: detect, repel, defeat, and mitigate risk, threats. That's a very focusing purpose statement, and that's an example of, for Sandia, what benefits society at the same time it benefits what you're trying to drive as a bottom line. As a government-inspired organization, it's probably easier to understand how you have a purpose statement that aligns with a public purpose. For corporations, this is often harder. Let's move into the anticipate phase. You need to expect the unexpected. Because someone could be sitting in a different room right now trying to figure out some way to come after you. You need to be prepared to respond to it. An example was Mattel. Mattel woke up one morning and had a banner unfurled over their Los Angeles headquarters with a big picture of Ken doll saying, "Barbie, it's over. I don't date girls that kill rainforests." This wasn't something Mattel did. It wasn't something Mattel's supplier did. It was a supplier of supplier that they were going after. But if you're somebody that's producing packaging materials coming out of Indonesia, and they were unfurling that banner in some rural part of Indonesia, nobody would be paying any attention. So they go to where people are going to be paying attention, where there's a TV networks that would be covering it. So you need to think all the way out, not just what Sandia is doing, but the people that are connected around Sandia, what they're doing, and what you could be called to action for. You need to figure out what cannons are facing in your direction, and you need to look, right up the barrel of that cannon to see what might be coming your way. You need to figure out what kind of wake are you leaving behind, and the activities you're doing, who are you impacting, and what are they thinking about that? Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they trying to figure out a way to stop you from doing it? You need to investigate yourself. If you were running for Congress, the first thing you do is have somebody research your background. Understanding the dirt on you is more important than understanding the dirt on the other person. Because when they come after you on it, you need to have game through, how am I going to respond to this? Or should I get this out earlier? Because you need to be prepared for the fire when it happens. And we have plenty of fires in the political process. You may have a fire or two in your organization as well. If you want to figure out how to go after an organization like Sandia, there's a lot of people well trained. If you want to know how to unfurl a banner or create a protest in front of your organization, just go to ruckus.org and they'll show you how. But when you come to business schools or engineering schools, they don't teach business or engineers how to play defense, much less how to play offense. And in this space, if you don't have a good story to tell, get one. And you ought to be saying it all the time, because if you're not saying your good story all the time, you're going to find yourself on defense. One example of this is Nike. Nike was going across, doing all kinds of wonderful business. Everything was going swell. All of a sudden, they woke up one morning, and they were being painted as the poster child for child labor. Something that, though it was decades ago, as I go around the world, people young and old still remember this incident. Even though Nike's done wonderful things since then, this still hangs over their reputation. That's on the downside. On the positive side, Toyota got California to allow them to use their Prius on their sane lane with only one driver. This helped in California encourage a more responsible transportation system, but clearly was a big boon to Toyota in that they were able to sell more of their Priuses because they could be used with just one driver on the sane lane. I just want to tell you that in both those cases, Nike's stumble, as well as Toyota's boon, was not a function of the marketplace. It was a function of how they engage with shapeholders in the non-market. Now you say that doesn't apply to government-funded entities? Think about Planned Parenthood and the fact that their funding has been called into question and been a part of a national debate. That's because an activist figured out this is somebody I'm going to go after and figure out how I can impact their government funding. Now, you have your friends down there in the White House. If they had gotten their degree from our school, they would probably be a much more formidable nemesis to you. So sitting out there, they're not having as big of an effect, but if they took an action very similar to what went after Planned Parenthood, you could be the center of debate. And are you prepared for that? So, mission does make a difference. How do you think about this? How do you anticipate this? You need to have a narrow focus for your main operations in your organization, your business. The detect and the focus statement you went through. Having a narrow focus from an operating perspective, being the best of whatever you are is good, but it's not good when it comes to engaging the non-market. You need to have a broader focus. We're all a product of our own environments. We have a lot of scientific backgrounds here, a lot of people from the Southwest. When you come to it, though, not everybody thinks like a scientist. Interestingly, Pew Charitable Trust did a survey of the mix of factors influencing public views on 22 science-related issues that we wrestle with here. And they go through, and depending on the issue, was your party, your ideology affecting you? Was your age, your degree of science knowledge, your gender, your race, ethnicity, your religion? How does that impact how you think about this? And it's quite intriguing, because if you look at, for example, science knowledge, whether you have more or less science knowledge, those with more science knowledge ask the question, is government funding of engineering and technology, does it pay off? Not surprisingly, those with more science knowledge say yes. Those with less science knowledge say it's not worth it. This is a key issue, I would guess, for you. Government funding of basic science pays off. Those with a lot of science knowledge say yes. Those with a lot of little science knowledge say no. So if I ask these questions of this audience, you might all conclude that the answer is yes, and everybody you talk to thinks the answer is yes. But if you go into a completely different audience, they're going to come up with a very different situation. And keep in mind that here in Washington, we're responding to our overall constituents, whoever they are, wherever they are. And there's a lot more people that don't understand science than understand science. Let's just take the issue of Republicans versus Democrats, conservatives versus liberals. When it comes to building more nuclear power plants, now I know you're not really in the nuclear power plant business, but it gives you a sense as how people think about nuclear. Republicans favor more nuclear power plants. Democrats generally oppose it. Not all Democrats, not all Republicans, but generally overall. Government funding for basic science pays off. Republicans, fiscally conservatives, say, let's leave that to the private industry. The Democrats would say, let's fund it. So that they may be for science funding, but they're not really for nuclear. The Republicans may be for nuclear, but they're not really for funding. So you have sort of a complicated little path you need to go down there. Let's take older versus younger. When it comes to your climate change focus, Earth is warming due to human activity. Older people on average say no. Younger people say yes. But on the flip, older people generally prefer building more nuclear power plants. They're more comfortable with nuclear. The young people opposed to it. You go to women versus men. Women are opposed to nuclear power plants. Men are generally for it. Women think the Earth is warming. Men aren't so sure. And we take post-grad degree versus high school degree on a whole range of issues. Nuclear power plants, whether Earth is warming, government funding, whether we should just leave it to private, changes differently. So if you're a political actor, you are going to be sensitive to, if you're a congressman or woman, the 700,000 people in your district, what do they think? You frankly don't care what you think if you don't happen to live in the 6th District of Minnesota. What do the people of the 6th District of Minnesota think, and how are they going to be responding to these issues? And those are the things you need to understand. And how you appeal to a particular political actor or not, you may use a different issue. So you need to be, just as a submarine is surrounded by water, you're surrounded by your own experiences. And even though you think you got all these people working together in Albuquerque, you're really still a microcosm. You need to have, like a submarine has that periscope that gets a full 360-degree view of the world around it so it doesn't bump into anything. You need to figure out ways in which you can inject into your decision-making process that same 360-degree view to make the right decisions. Let me give you an example. How many of you have seen Fahrenheit 9/11? We got a few in the audience. So how did I do? How was I in the movie? Well, I not only made the movie, I not only made the trailer, I was the cover of the trailer. And so I was coming back from a vote in Congress, and all of a sudden I have this overweight guy with a camera right in my face asking me questions. Anybody smart enough or have a good enough memory to remember what question they asked me? We'll let you think on that for a while, but people thought that I should have gotten an Oscar for Best Actor in a Conscripted Role. But the question he asked me was, would you help me get other members of Congress to get their kids to join the Army and go to Iraq? That was the question he asked me. And what was my answer? He didn't include my answer because it didn't fit his narrative, but he just left this look on my face and gave everybody the impression that my answer was no. And why do I have that look on my face? I have that look on my face because I'm saying to myself, how am I going to convince my kid to join the Army if he's already committed to the Navy? So clearly, Michael Moore was leaving a deceptive message. From a business perspective, he made a lot of money on the movie, so having a narrow focus on telling liberals and people that don't like America what they want to hear, he made a lot of money on that. But he didn't have that broader focus to come and give the true message. But what I want you to think about is to realize and think, Michael Moore or their equivalent could all of a sudden pick up something you're doing and you could be next on their hit parade. Have you thought through what that movie might be, and have you thought through how you'd respond to it? That's why you need to have this 360-degree view. You may not be thinking about it if you're just focusing amongst yourself. You need to be having others' inputs to figure out what that might be. I always tell folks to begin with that you need to both read from the right, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, I view as the voice of the intelligent right, and from the left, the New York Times or just about any other paper in the country would be viewed as the voice of the left. But then you also need to have an international view because the international view is often different than the American view. And you need to have this because when somebody comes at you, a New York minute truly will be 59 seconds too slow. You need to be prepared. You need to have already thought through what your answer is, and you need to be coming back in minutes and hours, not days and weeks. Then you need to assess when they're coming after you what's going on here. The two questions you're asking, is this legit or not? Is there an upside for me or not? And they may be judging that based on a moral standard. They may be judging that based on a policy standard. And when you're calculating their cost-benefit analysis, when you're in activist groups, your benefits are getting you to change your behavior, getting a new law enacted, and how that might help their fundraising. Their cost is what it takes to identify and organize and motivate a big enough group to get you to change. And when you think about, for example, a Sierra Club, which is one of the more formidable activist groups here, if you thought about them as something different, they are very active and engaging in the political process. They're claiming victory for Shell stopping to drill in the Arctic, even though it had nothing to do with them. That when they drilled, they didn't find oil. So they stopped drilling. They figured the price of oil is down. We're not doing it. Even so, they're going to take credit for that. And by claiming credit for that with an audience that isn't going to be thinking that through that deeply, they're going to get more fundraising from that. So them opposing that helped them raise money. That's a benefit. And it's going to make, that's the calculation that's going to go in their mind, whether it makes sense to come after you or not. So at this point, what I'm going to want us to do is I'm going to want us to get groups of 5 just near you. We're just going to take about 10 minutes or so. And I'm wanting you to come both opportunities and risk. What have you really wanted out of Washington but not gotten out of Washington that you'd like to get, so that as we're going through our conversation here today, we can be responding to that. But also, I've tried to tell you that there's not just opportunities here in Washington, that there could be risk. Of all the things that I talked about, what are some of the risks that might be things that you ought to be preparing for? So when you talk about this opportunity of solutions to evolving threats, which forces you out of your comfort zone and has you thinking about things other than what you're maybe working on your day-to-day basis, what threat could I be the answer to? And how do I position Sandia in that way? And who's concerned about that threat, that I can make sure that they're being provided this information? So, if, you have multiple targeted newsletters giving updates on certain things, who do I make sure I'm sending this piece on cybersecurity to? Just to make sure that they're getting the latest, greatest information because if they perceive me as giving them interesting thoughts and ideas and keeping me informed, I'm going to find that as positive. I don't frankly view that as lobbying, but in reality, it's going to be elevating your profile on a specific issue that's of concern to specific people, that's keeping them informed and bringing ideas to them, providing a benefit that presumably you were made to provide, and that could be very helpful. Other questions? All right, great framing for the opportunities and threats we have. Let's move on to the conversation of messaging. So when we think about messaging, we're moving down. When I think about my next 7 steps, there's 4: advance, avert, assemble, acquiesce. And which one you do when you're engaging either an opportunity or a threat is a function of 2 things. Is it legitimate or not? Can I have an upside or not? And I'm just going to go through 3 of them very briefly and then focus on the last. The first, advance. If you think of Siemens, Siemens wants to sell sophisticated equipment around the world that provides benefits in a whole number of ways, providing energy, clean water, healthcare, but they're not going to sell it in Mozambique unless somebody in Mozambique knows how to operate that machine. So they invest in engineering education, specific engineering education, in countries around the world, which is helping to create an educated workforce in countries around the world. But that educated workforce is absolutely imperative for there to be in those different countries in order to operate their equipment. It's an example of where they're benefiting society at the same time they're benefiting themselves. Or when Tide creates concentrated detergent, their customers are going to have less trucks to ship, less volume. It's going to be better for the environment, but it's also going to be cheaper and better for Tide and their customers. Avert. Sometimes there's legitimate issues that are concern to people, but there's no upside to you in implementing it. And I can't tell you how many people have come to my office in Washington and said, we don't like this bill, we want you to stop it. And I say to them, but it's a legitimate issue, what's your answer? And they say, we don't really know, but we don't like this bill. It's going to hurt us, stop it. And I say, you can't fight something with nothing. If it's a legitimate issue, you need to have your solution to it that answers the question that's different than what you're going against. For example, the soda companies are facing a lot of battles on obesity. So they all got together, Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper, Snapple, Pepsi, everybody got together and said, we're going to voluntarily implement this standard that we're going to put the calorie information on every individual serving. We're not required to do that. We think this is an issue of individual responsibility, that people make their own decisions what they eat and drink. We want to make sure they're informed in doing it. That's their defense. This helps their defense be stronger and more vital. If Congress feels, I got to do something about this, they can make this a law and require it, and they're guiding the way to avert worse things from happening. The third thing is acquiesce. Now, anybody who's read the book Heidi knows that the Swiss think their milk is better than everybody else's milk. You could spend a long time trying to convince the Swiss of that. It probably wouldn't be worth it. That's why, of course, McDonald's is Swiss. You all knew that. What they're saying is, we're just going to buy all of our milk that we're using for our ice cream in Switzerland from Switzerland. The final, though, is where we spend the most time here, is when you need to assemble the win. This is when somebody's asking something legitimate of you that you need to respond to, or you need to go into a political contest to win that. And to do that, to assemble to win, you need to focus on what, where, who, and how. And let me focus first on the what, where, and I'm going to give you a little snippet from a movie called Thank You for Smoking. I'm not promoting smoking in any way here, but if you're representing somebody politically, it's a lot harder to represent a tobacco company than represent Walt Disney. And so the people that represent the most disliked people are actually the best at what they do. So let's pay attention. This is the lobbyist for the tobacco companies talking to his son about his trade. That will hopefully give you some insights into how this works.
So, what happens when you're wrong?
Joey, I'm never wrong.
But you can't always be right.
Well, if it's your job to be right, then you're never wrong.
But what if you are wrong?
Okay, let's say that you're defending chocolate and I'm defending vanilla. Now, if I were to say to you, vanilla is the best flavor ice cream, you'd say,
No, chocolate is.
exactly. But you can't win that argument. So, I'll ask you. So you think chocolate is the end-all and be-all of ice cream, do you?
It's the best ice cream. I wouldn't order any.
Oh, so it's all chocolate for you, is it?
Yes, chocolate is all I need.
Well, I need more than chocolate. And for that matter, I need more than vanilla. I believe that we need freedom and choice when it comes to our ice cream, and that, Joy Naylor, that is the definition of liberty.
But that's not what we're talking about.
Ah, but that's what I'm talking about.
But you didn't prove that vanilla was the best.
I didn't have to. I proved that you're wrong. And if you're wrong, I'm right.
But you still didn't convince me.
It's that I'm not after you. I'm after them.
So if you understood that, you understand everything you need to know about politics. So they were talking about what and where. The kid was talking about, is chocolate the best ice cream? And his where was himself. The dad realized he can't win that argument, so he comes up with a different question. His question is, should you have choice in ice cream? And he chose the broader populace as his where. And what you'll find is that political debates are battles over questions. The amateurs try to answer your question. You are wasting your time answering your own question, and you're double wasting your time if you're answering the other person's question. All of your energy should be focused on establishing your question being in the mind of the people. Because when they're going to the voting booth, if their question is, do I want to make sure our nuclear stockpile is safe, they're going to be pro-Sandia. If their question is, do I really like the nuclear weapons, it might not be the right response to you. So you need to get your question established, and you can have multiple questions. Let me just give you a couple ideas of the battles that are going on here in Washington. The media companies, those that produce the movies and the musics, the Viacoms, the Sonys, Paramount Studios of the world, were worried because people in this digital age were stealing their movies and their music, getting it digitally transferred without paying for it. So they presented a question: should U.S. companies assist foreign companies in stealing U.S. properties? They wanted to shut down these foreign websites that were facilitating the stealing of movies and music. And they chose as their where Congress. They had a bill, strong bipartisan support. The committee supported it. It actually passed one of the committees in overwhelming fashion, was moving on towards passage. But the tech companies had a different idea. They came out with a different question and a different where. They said, do you want the federal government to black out your internet access? And they chose their arena, not Congress, but public opinion. And they shut down their websites and put up a little note saying, you know, Congress is trying to shut down the internet. Call your congressman. How'd that work? This bill that was moving to passage got pulled and nothing happened. So the question that you frame, the yes and no answer, leads to the solution you're looking for. But they had a battle over questions, and new media beat old media. You take another issue, focus on global warming. What's the question in the arena for the two sides on global warming? On the global warming, advocates are saying something like, do you want to stop the seas from rising? And if the answer is yes, then let's do something about global warming. Their arena is the UN, currently being played out in Paris as we speak. The opponents say, do you want to save jobs? If you want to save jobs, then no, you don't want to do any of this stuff that they're talking about. And their arena is the public opinion that doesn't like things that are going to necessarily be restrictive of economic activity here in America. And their specific arena is the U.S. Senate, where so far the lights have all been red on taking action on this, which is why I think the President is trying to steer clear of anything that has to go through the Senate route on this. So who's winning so far? So far nothing's happened. Something may happen in Paris, it may change. But if it does change, I think it'll be because the question has started to change with the Pope and others engaging more broadly on the topic. So you can have multiple faces. This is Washington, after all. You can have, more than one face. You can be two faces. You can be four faces, as long as they don't conflict with one another. So let's just take and think about how they appeal to different audiences. Nuclear weapons is something you have something to do with. If you think of that nuclear deterrent as being overwhelming force, Pew Charitable Trust came out with a survey recently where they divided America into 8 typologies. And I'd encourage you to go on to this and have a very short question and answer. You can go through and it'll tell you which one of these 7 categories you belong to. So rather than just say it's Republicans, Democrats, they divide them into different groups, some on the left, some on the right, some in the middle. And as you can see here, the question of overwhelming force, best way to defeat terrorism versus too much force creates hatred and more terror. That there are 2 categories of conservatives that believe in overwhelming force. Interestingly, what they call the faith and family left also agrees with that. So there's a segment of the left that appeals to more of the socially conservative, as well as the conservatives that appeal to. So those types of audiences, you're going to find receptivity. The other types of audiences, as you can see, are going to be solidly against you. And when you think about just whether to build nuclear power plants, you can see here that, again, this is something that's more receptive on the right side of the spectrum than it is on the left side of the spectrum. When it comes to counterterrorism, if that's a threat you're trying to appeal to. Interestingly, they recently did a survey as to what's most important to you as a voter. Economy, number 1, healthcare, number 2. This changes every month. We get reports on this all the time. But terrorism was far above environment. So right now, nuclear deterrence with Russia isn't the main people in people's mind. Terrorism is. Therefore, counterterrorism may have strong appeal with a wide segment of the population. Cybersecurity. This was a survey Pew did worldwide about what different regions of the world thought about the most important risk. If you look at this, worldwide, global climate change is the most important risk. But if you look within the United States, for example, number 1 is Iran's nuclear program, number 2 is number 1 is ISIS, number 2 is Iran's nuclear program, and number 3 is cyber attacks. So cyber attacks at 59 is far above global climate change. That would say, more broadly, there's perhaps more resonance with counterterrorism than there is with climate change in America. If we take climate, interestingly, this compares the 2009 and 2014. In the last 5 years, not a lot more people have been convinced that it's because of human activity. It's just a lot of people that thought it's because of natural patterns are moving more into the there's no solid evidence phase. But public opinion really hasn't changed despite all the stuff that's been talked about it. But clearly the scientists have a different view than the public on this topic. But even though the scientists are at 87%, still 37% of the people think that the scientists don't agree. So these are the opinions you're up against. Now, if you look at these same 7 groups that I talked about, the typology that Pew put forth, and you ask questions of no solid warming, no solid evidence of warming, and yes, warming caused by, you can see that across the spectrum, this is a very partisan issue that impacts how they're thinking about it. When you think that the country has gone too far on protecting enviro versus do whatever it takes, wide divide on that. When you think about stricter environmental laws, cost too many jobs versus stricter environmental laws worth it, again, in this case you have hard-pressed skeptics, which are younger people that are having a hard time getting a job. They may tend to be more liberal, but they're hyper-focused on what could affect their ability to get on a career track that they're more excited about. Alternative energy, again, a wide difference. And it's not just America. You should know that this partisan difference exists across the planet. So Australia, Canada, Germany, UK, their conservative and liberal parties are pretty far apart on these issues. Interestingly, I spoke of the Pope. The Pope has been creating sort of a new question. So I would suggest that there's more progress in Paris than we've had in the past. It's probably more attributable to him than to any of the political actors engaging in here, because Catholics are far more concerned about action than others, perhaps by his narrative. So what I'm going to tell you is you don't have to just pick one. Let me give you an example of how I engage with 3 different questions. So I had an amendment for a transportation bill when I was in Congress that was the only amendment that passed the transportation bill that year. And we only do a transportation bill about every 5 years. Hopefully one's actually going to get out of Congress this year. But the president was against it. The chairman of the committee in my own party was against it. The ranking member from the other party was against it. I still got it passed. How did I get it passed? Appealing to 3 different audiences. For the fiscal conservatives, I put a question of, do you want to increase the gas tax? My bill provided new lanes on interstates privately funded with tolls. And so this would decrease the need for a gas tax increase. So the Wall Street Journal, my bill was called the FAST Act, Freeing Alternatives to Speedy Travel. And so they came out with an op-ed in favor of my bill. Then I went to the other side of the spectrum. The liberals are those in the construction industry saying, do you want to increase road dollars? Because by having new lanes funded by tolls, there'd be more capacity on the roads, more spending. They like that. So I reached out to a more liberal outlet with the Washington Post with an op-ed in favor of it. But the trick was I reached out to the truckers. Because although my bill provided toll funding on new lanes, it prohibited toll funding in existing lanes. Under the idea, if we've already paid for those gas tax dollars, why should somebody be able to put a toll on that? Truckers don't like tolls on existing lanes. So I got on to midnight at the Trucking Bozo radio program and talked to all the truckers that are out there with their computers in their trucks, and I said, here's the website you go, you put your zip code, it'll tell you who your members of Congress is. Here's the 1-800 number for Congress. Once you know your congressman, call them and have you transferred and tell them you want them to support the FAST Act. Then I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, was on the Open Road Cafe. I walked out of my office, I met another congressman in the hallway, and he said, all right, I'll vote for your darn FAST Act. Just tell those truckers to stop calling me. So the combination of those 3 resulted in, with the support of 33 Democrats, my bill got passed. But I had 3 different things I was pushing on. If I'd only pushed on 2 out of those 3, I wouldn't have got it passed. So when we talked about that you got complacent with a strong champion, and that now you need a broad array of people that are thinking positive things about you, this is an example how that broad array is needed. So rather than just having one big gun, which you can think of as Senator Domenici, you need to have targeted little segments that you can piece together and have a much wider appeal. And that's the challenge you need to have. But none of those can conflict with one another. But if you looked at my 3 messages, they weren't in conflict with each other. They were all stood on their own and didn't conflict with other messages you have. So you need to have messages that don't conflict with one another. Let me give you a compliment as to how you're doing that. If you go to your website and you go under programs, it lists nuclear, defense systems, energy and climate, international homeland, and nuclear security. Now recognize that the 3rd slot here is energy and climate. You click on nuclear, and all of a sudden energy climate is off to the right side. Because the other 3 all lump together under a security message. And generally people that care about nuclear weapons, as I've hopefully pointed out by now, probably care less about or have a negative view towards energy and climate, or sick and tired of talking about it. So it's appropriate to slide that to the right. But the most interesting thing is you also see that this frame, you're on your main web page, about programs, research. If you go back to your main web page, that stayed the same. Now if I click on energy and climate, I've totally separated from the main web page. There's nothing about nuclear weapons here anymore. It's just energy and climate. You know, stationary power, I got these nice windmills. I have to work hard to get back to the page with nuclear weapons on it. Because the people that care about energy and climate don't want to hear about nuclear weapons. And so you're going and talking to somebody about energy and climate, and this is the link you give. They go straight to there, and they don't even ever find out anything else you do. Now, I'm here to tell you it's a brilliant strategy, so whoever did that...
that was Johnny.
I noticed it, and it's an example of the targeting message. When you say, you know, what's the difference between presenting yourself positively to the public and lobbying? This is an example of how you can present yourself to the public and to different audiences in a positive, most constructive way possible for framing your message in the right way. Did any of you guys notice that in your website before? No. And this is how those of us with a political mind are looking for these things and analyzing them in a completely different way. So, on the who, again, when I talked about Japan, you need an inside game and an outside game. Professor Billet's going to talk to you about the inside game, but it needs to be reinforced by the outside game. I hope that you're not prohibited from having an outside game of influencing what people are thinking about the topics you care about, even if you are restricted from doing the inside game. So when you're playing outside, those that are most different from you are most valuable. Milk and cookies are different from each other. One's hard and crunchy, one's liquidy, but they go fabulous together. And it's the same way with the allies. I divide activist groups into two. What I call carrot activist groups that actually want to entice you into a more constructive behavior. And even though this line looks ferocious, World Wildlife Fund is an example of a carrot activist groups that works with organizations to help them find a better way to address their operations. And then stick activist groups. Even they just want to beat you over the head. Even though this young lady looks very friendly, she's representing Greenpeace, and Greenpeace is generally a stick activist group most of the time that just wants to, you know, go after somebody. So when you're looking for these, you have to look to not only what your more natural position, which for me is to the right, but you need to do a better job than I'm doing here, keeping your eyes open when you're turning to the unnatural position. And you need to fully examine the middle to find all the different folks out there that you could engage with. And you're going to need those, because when you're in a battle, having those people different from you as your allies are going to be very, very helpful. When it comes to how, I always offer extra credit in my classes if they can find anything negative about the Chinese government on the front page of China Daily, or anything positive about the U.S. government on the front page of Political. And so far, I've never had to give extra credit. Intriguingly, I've taught in both business schools and here at our school, which is more politically oriented. The business schools actually try. They go out, they read the paper, they try to come back with something. Our students don't even try. I mean, they know this is true. My point here, though, is to say you need your own China Daily. If you care about China, China Dailies is the Chinese government's mouthpiece to tell you what do we think. You and every organization needs to have your own China Daily, because there are people out there that will try to make what you're doing confusing. They'll try to make it sound complicated. They'll try to spin webs around it. You don't want to just let the mainstream media be the only people that's analyzing that. You need to be able to simplify it. Specifically for those that are dependent on you. When you go back to those stakeholders, those customers, suppliers, employees, they need to know, what does Sandia think about this? Somebody saying X, Y, or Z, what's our view on this? And you need to bring it straight to their iPhone, so you're going after them immediately. And if you don't know how to use it, just ask your son-in-law and he'll show you how. So this is what you need to do, and you need to have, perhaps other messages out there that are framing the issue. So our second huddle is, what are the questions for which Sandia feels that you are the answer to.